Welcome to the series Alexandra Speaks at the African Book Festival for 2022. And today I have two amazing guests. I'm actually really excited, so I will come straight to it, introduce them. Dr. Athambile Masola and Bongani Kona. Welcome, first of all. So great that you're here. And we'll be discussing today a bit of your work, a bit of your aspirations, as well what kind of books you are reading or going to read. And then, on that note, I would like to say, congratulations, Atambile. You are the winner of the HSS Award 2022 for Best Poetry Fiction. And your work, Ilifa, is the winning piece. So that is so amazing. Congratulations. I've never won a literary prize for anything, but in my wildest dreams, that must be amazing.
Thank you so much.
So, both of you, how are you doing?
Okay, I'll go first. I'm partly excited because it's just been a bit of a whirlwind of a few days with the award being announced on Thursday night, while I'm getting ready for term 2 next week, Monday. So yeah, I'm doing good. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Bongani and thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I'm also doing good. And firstly, but also congratulations to Athambile, and I've read about your work and just looking forward to this evening. And that's it from my side. I'm doing okay, also preparing for term 2, which starts next Monday, on Monday.
Well, great. I'm also doing very well. Not preparing for term 2, but always preparing for my life. So I guess we're all on the same page when it comes to preparations. So great. Who do I start with? Well, maybe, unlike the usual with ladies first, I start with the gentleman. Bongani Kona, you are the editor of the anthology Our Ghosts Were Once People. So basically, just to get it right, you decided one day there is a universal topic, especially in South Africa, about death and grievance, where you felt like you want different perspectives. You had your own, but you wanted to create a sort of justice league of friends and colleagues to create this this anthology that gives us insights of so many perspectives on death and grievance. What made you do this? Why not just write the essay and that's it?
Thank you so much, Alex. I hope I'll do a good job of answering your question. Our Ghosts Were Once People, I don't have a copy with me here, is an anthology around stories of death and dying, mourning and grief. And it actually, I think the sort of starting point was the tragic killing of a first-year student in Cape Town, where I live. She had just gone to the post office and never made it back. It was a really tragic thing to have happened, but also just witnessing the reaction of the community, because I'm close to where that happened, but also just the community of people, how people responded to it, both within Cape Town, both among the student community here in Cape Town, just both within the country, just seeing the kind of outpouring of grief, like really just kind of, I was really deeply moved by it. And in a way, just wanted to kind of respond to the moment. And I knew from the get-go that it's obviously not something one person can do. So just how do we think about this problem of grief from this point of view? So that was the starting point. And then the second thing, which I'll say, I hope I'm answering the question, is my background is mostly within literary journals and so forth. And one of the things that I really love about literary journals is how they're able to kind of explore one thing. I think the word I'm looking for is prismatically, how they can explore one thing from different viewpoints, and you can use different forms of writing. So whether it's the essay, the poetry, or fiction. So that was really just the idea. And I think from that, is just, yeah, just that was pretty much the idea, just setting up. That's how the idea came about. And then secondly, some of it, the process of selecting, of inviting writers is a much longer discussion, but I'll give you sort of like an idea of what was in my head. So the book opens with an essay by a writer called Mary Watson, who won the Caine Prize in 2005, I think. And I remember many years ago when I was working as a book reviewer, I still review books, but not maybe as regularly as I did then. She had come out with a second novel. This was in 2010. And I remember that she had said, in reading the reports, that she had said that the novel, she had written it in 5 weeks, and it would come out of this immense grief for a mother who had passed away at a hospice from cancer. So when I reached out to her, I was like, can you please take us back into that moment? But in that process, her father subsequently died, and it was during COVID, also again from cancer. So that's how that's how I was approaching the process of, because I'd read something and I wondered if the person could reflect on the particular thing. So I'm gonna hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much. It gives a much more intense perspective and light, and that such tragic events led to, in a way, very creative, but also maybe a healing process in terms of writing and putting this collection together for readers, for writers. You mentioned as well the way how you like that you can approach on different angles with poetry, which is a very good, how do you say, jump to Athambile, who chose poetry fiction to tackle a huge topic. It's on the perspective of women and also the perception of women in South Africa, which is probably immense. And one would wonder, poetry fiction, a whole new way to approach it rather than a more, how shall I say, sociological approach that maybe one is used to when discussing such matters. So tell me, what made you choose poetry fiction?
Oh, wow. The beauty about poetry, I think, is that it chooses you in a sort of way. So you have to write the poems as they come. I think of poetry as like voices that come to me rather than I go out and find the poetry or kind of go out and mine the poetry. So on the one hand, I think it was not mining, but kind of listening or paying attention to the voices that were coming to me. I think also particularly because they were coming to me in isiXhosa, which is a language that I speak and I write, but I ordinarily don't really, at the time I hadn't written a lot. So all my blogs are in English, all my academic writing is in English. Most of my public writing is in English, but there was something peculiar about poetry. So on the one hand, it was kind of paying attention to that. And the collection itself, I mean, I have my grandmother on the cover, which makes it very personal, because a lot of the stories are personal in a way. And so, yeah, it was a paying attention. I think it was an exercise in paying attention, which took me aback because most of my writing is, I think I've made this distinction and I don't know if it's helpful or not, kind of like I have a lot of cerebral writing. So a lot of my academic writing, I think, comes from like this part of my life, but the poetry kind of comes from this part. Which is a very different kind of exercise. Like poetry comes early in the morning, whereas, you know, the rest of the other writing comes, you know, in like different kinds of patterns. I have a different approach to writing, different genres of writing, maybe, let me put it that way. Yeah, so I think it was an exercise in paying attention.
Exercise in paying attention. I like that phrase. So I would like to know, in contrary, for academic writing, how would you phrase that one or coin that process if poetry is an exercise in paying attention?
Oh, that's tricky because I guess, yeah, I mean, I'll leave it to the academic writing feels very cerebral. It feels very argumentative. It feels very kind of structured. And also kind of, when I write a poem, usually it happens I write a poem in one sitting sometimes, and then maybe I'll come back to it over and over again, in a different way to like academic writing, where like I'll write it and then we'll go to a reviewer, or I'll send it to a friend to read, and they kind of do it. I genuinely think like an essay, reading an essay and reading a poem are two very different exercises. So even as I send out my essays or my readings to different people, I'm asking them to do different things. So I think of my academic writing as cerebral.
Yeah. Right. Maybe I understood what you said, but I didn't entirely feel it. Maybe you could give us a sample in terms of how do we listen to a poem? Especially in Xhosa, to me, this is a whole new experience. So I am very keen on hearing maybe maybe a small one or a few sentences just to get a feel for it. Also, a feel for the language for all the listeners and viewers that are new to the world of Xhosa.
Sure. So I write in isiXhosa, which is a language people would describe as a Nguni language, and which is closer. I think people would know isiZulu more commonly. I'm trying to find a shorter poem. All the ones that are coming to me. Okay, I'll read this one. It's called Imbali, which is history in English. And this is the poem I read a few nights ago at the award ceremony. Okay, Imbali. Zibhale, kodwa ungabhali esandini, hleze uhambe namanzi olwandle. Zibhale, kodwa ungabhali emthini, hleze bawugawule okanye bawutshise. Zibhale, kodwa ungazibhali ngamafu, hleze abaleke nomoya okanye abe yimvula. Zibhale, kodwa ungabhali ngembolwa nodaka, zona zihlambeka lula ngamanzi. Zibhale ngesiqu sakho, abo banamehlo bakubone. Zibhale ngelizwi lakho, abo banendlebe bakuve. Zibhale ngeenyawo zakho, abo bafunayo bakulandele. Zibhale ngobuqu bakho, bungaze buvuthululwe njengothuli. And basically the poem is about how write yourself into history, but don't write yourself in sand, just in case it disappears with the ocean. Don't write yourself on the tree because it might be chopped down. Don't write yourself in the clouds because the clouds can run away with the wind and become the rain. Don't write yourself, but don't write yourself with ochre and mud because those can be washed away easily. Write yourself with your very essence, so those who see you can, so those with eyes can see you. Write yourself with your voice, so those with ears can hear you. Write yourself with your feet, so those who can follow you. Write yourself with your very essence, so that you may not be swept away like ash. That's a paraphrase.
Oh, wow. It was beautiful. It sounded beautiful by the way you read it, because even though I don't understand, it had some kind of profoundness. Your voice was soft and it was touching me. And now when you translated it in English, I felt like, oh, wow, these are very deep meanings. And Bongani, what do you think? Did you understand?
Yeah, I did. And if it's okay, I actually want to ask you a couple of questions, Athambile. sort of interrelated questions. One is the cover of your book. That's such beautiful photo of your grandmother. Would you mind telling us a little bit about it? And then secondly, I guess this thing of writing yourself into history, I suppose, like, I see this as part of your work is spotlighting Black women's writing and Black women's writing throughout over many years. And I was just wondered, how did you arrive at that? And then I have a third question, which is, forgive me for being naughty. Coming back to what was the most challenging thing about writing this collection? Like, what was the most difficult thing about, of the writing process and the editing process as well?
Sure. So I think, so the cover, so one of the poems is actually about my grandmother. So my grandmother was a very cheeky person. And one of the poems actually that is about her is called Ikaka, which is basically feces. I'll use the PC word. But my grandmother was very cheeky, but my grandmother was also, so the title of the book, Ilifa, is inheritance. And my grandmother captures the sense of inheritance. This is one of the pictures that she gave me before she passed away. So I kind of wanted to capture this idea of inheritance, the title, and the poem itself, Ilifa, which is the very last poem in the collection, tightly connected to this idea of inheritance, but also inherited loss. There's a sense of loss that's kind of threaded throughout the poem. And I also just think it's a very beautiful portrait. You know, she's in her 20s, it's in the 1930s or 40s maybe. And I mean, a lot of the work itself is dedicated to Unontsizi Mgqwetho, who was the 1920s Xhosa poet who used to write in the newspapers, as well as Victoria Swartboy, who wrote the first novel by a Xhosa woman in the 1930s. So it's also kind of paying homage to this kind of aesthetic of woman, you know. So that's what the cover was about. So it's not so much it's about my grandmother. There's one or two poems that are actually about my grandmothers, but the people who, I mean, isiXhosa, we talk of it as being a mother tongue. So by writing in isiXhosa, I'm writing in my mother tongue. So I wanted to kind of pay homage to this idea of the mother. And then this idea of the history, I mean, what this poem captures is the challenge with women's histories is that they disappear. So they disappear because women change their names. So women get married and you are looking for, I don't know, Nokutela Mdima, and all of a sudden you're looking for Nokutela Dube, you know, and that's how women get lost, purely just by change of surname. Sometimes women get lost because people deem them as not important. People don't deem the stories of women as important. So, I mean, there's a poem called Uhlanga in the collection where I kind of take this practice of listing women's names and what that listing means. And a lot of my way of coming into women's histories is through my friends. So my friends noticed that I was interested in these poems. So the poem Uhlanga is like, I come to this woman through this woman. I come to this book through this person. I come to Daughters of Africa through my sister. I come to Loretta Ngobo through my friend. And it's just a listing. And I like the methodology of listing because in isiXhosa, we have this practice of ukuzithutha, which is you list your clan name. So when people ask me who I am, usually they don't ask for my name, they ask for who are my people. And so I'll list my patrilineal names, and sometimes I'll list my matrilineal names. So I'm also playing on this kind of listing and history as a listing. So that's how I kind of come into this conversation about women's histories. It's about remembering, it's about listing, it's about names. I'm very interested in names and how people's names just get lost along the way. And then the challenges, oh my gosh, there were so many. The beauty, the least challenge was actually the editing part, because I found a really amazing editor, Oscar Masinyana, who I'd worked with over years. You know him. Yeah, he's amazing. So that was like the least of my problems, because Oscar does just an amazing job, and he just takes editing so seriously, and made such beautiful suggestions that I really took to heart. But the writing aspect of it was trying not to self-correct myself. So Xhosa has a long history of writing from 1823, maybe, when like the Bible was first printed, when the printing press arrived in Alice. But there's a very rigid sense of what is writing in isiXhosa means. And I was very deliberate about writing in isiXhosa in the way I use it. And having been born in a very urban setting and grown up in an urban setting, I had to really be okay with the fact that I was writing in isiXhosa as I speak it. Whereas isiXhosa is a very formal language and people write in stanzas. And so I was playing a lot with form. So those are some of the challenges of just like not censoring myself, so that I can experiment with the form and the language itself.
Thank you. Last question, I promise I'm not usurping, not taking over the job. Just, I guess, tell us who are some of the poets that have been important to you over this last 2 years, not over your whole life, but some of the poets that have been like companions to you over the last couple of years.
Oh, wow, that's such a beautiful question. Makhosa Zanaqaba is like my fave. My favorite poem of hers is Tongues of Their Mothers, which also really informs I think of it as like a methodology or like an epistemological something, but it really does something, because it's a beautiful, the first line of the poem is, I wish to write an epic poem about Sarah Baartman. And then the last poem, but I am not yet ready to write these poems, which is just such a beautiful tension. And then more recently, I'm really enjoying Lucille Clifton, just for the simplicity. I think I read Lucille while I was writing this collection, and because of just the language and the texture of isiXhosa, I wanted to capture some of that simplicity, and Lucille does that without like compromising on the depth. So like Lucille can write in like a very simple way, but you're like, oh, it like hits you. And I really enjoy that, of like, it's very simple, but then there's something else happening behind the simplicity. So yeah, those are my companions.
First of all, thank you for the questions. That was very interesting. And I had a feeling that the part of the grandmother would basically trigger you, because in your essay, basically is it inspired as well by your grandmother, since you tell her story in a way and how it is interlinked with your lives? Bongani?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. No, absolutely. So I grew up with my grandmother, and just an interesting fact, I guess, for Athambile, because we were talking about this before. So her father, I grew up in Zimbabwe, and my grandmother's father had migrated from Eastern Cape Side to Zimbabwe it was in Zimbabwe then, but in 1911. And then her husband, his father had migrated way earlier, sort of in the late 1800s. So anyway, I grew up with my grandmother, who passed away in 2019. And the sort of the foundational experience, I guess, of her life, or the experience that really deeply marked her, is that her husband was killed at the tail end of the Liberation War in Zimbabwe in 1979. And by the time, but when we grew up, she hardly ever mentioned it. She hardly ever said a word about it. I think I can actually count the 2 times that we spoke about that. But even those 2 times, if I was to measure it in minutes, it's less than 10 minutes. So I was just trying to write back. I was trying to write about that, what that meant. Why? I guess I was trying to explore her silence, or the reasons for her silence, and trying to find out why she never said anything. I'm doing a bad job of explaining the essay, but that's pretty much what the what the essay is about.
No, you're not doing a bad job at all, because in a sense, when Athambile said, is in a way of telling stories that are not told, as in, because a woman's stories just get lost just by the simply change of name. When you just said it out aloud like this, it's like, that's so true. It's a just simply act that is basically socially so accepted. It's like the change of a name. It's even we don't see a lot of men that take their women's name or their wife's name. It does exist, probably. Maybe it's another another topic for another day. But then I was just thinking, wow, were you also trying to tell your grandmother's story, or basically trying to even figure out your grandmother's story, because you felt like, wow, there's something that I wanted to know and I would like to maybe pay homage as well, but however, never had a chance in the way that you've wanted to, because your essay
Uh,
kind of explores a lot of questions.
yeah, so okay, so just two things. One is to explore, the intention is to explore the silence, but not in the frameworks that we get, right? Like there's silence and trauma, silence, not in those usual frameworks, to actually kind of find out that there's a different logic that was at work there. So trying to explore that, or possible reasons for that. And then the second thing is, I just wanted to say just more personally that my grandmother and I were very close. So when I began writing, I would always, because I then moved and then I'd go back home sort of every Christmas, I'd share things that I'd written. And the sort of the last piece, I think that she read, I'd referenced a conversation that we'd had about the war. So that was the last kind of piece that we'd read. So in a way, it felt like I was just kind of continuing that conversation, and that project is still ongoing. So in a way, still kind of continuing that conversation. So sure, I feel like I lost my train of thought.
No, I think I actually like it. I think like it's a very personal conversation in general that we are having, and also I've noticed when we spoke about languages and how I already felt touched about a language that I actually do not understand. I wanted to say hardly, but no, I do not understand. Let's be very real here. Hardly would kind of mean that I do speak a little, which is not the case. You as well have features. You obviously your poem is mainly in English, but then there are aspects as well where you choose to, I don't know, quote maybe your grandmother, or at least use words in Xhosa. Why is that the case, that you felt like this has to be expressed first in Xhosa before we even translate it?
Uh, Partly because she was Xhosa speaking from, so or she came from a Xhosa speaking family, and but so this is over like 100 years, right? So the language itself gets kind of, it picks up influences from the space that it's at. So we also grew up, I think it wouldn't be fair for me to say that we were speaking Xhosa. It was Xhosa mixed with Shona, mixed with English, mixed with Ndebele. It became its own kind of Creole, but I recognize it as the language that was in our family home. So in a way, to write about her, I needed to use, that's the language I've got to use, because that's the way that I hear her. And then of course, editors will say we'll have to translate for the readers and that sort of thing. But in any case, that's the way that I hear. But also, I think just one last thing, and I think Athambile would do a much better job of speaking to this. So the passage in the essay, I know I'm speaking about an essay that isn't many people haven't read. She speaks about, she had said one of our last conversations, that in the immediate aftermath of the war, in the sort of early 80s, she'd heard stories about, she'd heard stories about people, villagers who were just walking in the countryside, and then some bones would rise up and say, look, you need to go and find my family. And these people would walk for hundreds of kilometers trying to find that person's family and say, so-and-so is buried here. And I loved that cosmology, that world, for me, wasn't available in English. That kind of sensibility of seeing the world, and whether it's not saying true or false or fact or fiction, but I want to take this seriously, that this is the way things were happening. So a language also allows us access into that.
Thank you so much. Would you like to maybe share this sentence in Xhosa that you were hearing your grandmother in?
Okay, give me a second. I will just read it from the screen I got. I'll just read just the one passage.
Yes, please.
So yeah, we were having a conversation about the immediate aftermath of the war, and this is the passage from the essay. My grandmother recalls that skeletons littered the countryside during the wartime. Go and tell my family that this is what has happened to me. The bones would rise to testify to passerby. Kwezintsuku kunabantu abaninzi abasuka emakhayeni abo bengavalisanga. Hundreds of young men and women left to show up the war effort without saying goodbye properly. In the ritual sense, she said, their restless souls, buried in unmarked graves, now cried out to be returned. It's not like a direct translation as well, but I thought it would work for those purposes.
I am sure it does. Thank you so much for sharing this. Thank you for both of you sharing this. Actually, the conversation is not over. It's rather as it to be continued in August 26th to 28th. So please, if you like the conversation, if you want to meet these two beautiful and wonderful people, get to know more insights about Xhosa language, about traditions, about personal experiences, then the African Book Festival Berlin is definitely the place to be. I am going to be there. I'm looking so much forward to continue this conversation live on stage with you. And well, I can't express my gratitude. This was just amazing. Even you reading out these two parts, I was like, yes, I definitely need a translation in English soon. So that I have more of it. But then it was very, very beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you also to the audience to tune in. So yeah, this talk will be available online as well. So tell your friends, tell your neighbors, whoever might be interested. And then great, yes, the books are already available as well. The collection Ilifa. So please, for the Xhosa speaking audience, feel free. And also for the English speaking audience, Our Ghosts Were Once People. It's a great anthology. And last teaser, there's also one great piece of, or a series of pieces that Athambile is working on when it is the matter of discussing or talking about women's stories. It's called Imbokodo. And we're going to discuss this anthology, which is also inspired by Margaret Busby's, our headliners, New Daughters of Africa's anthology. So all of this is going to be showcased at the festival, so please be there. Thank you so much. Have a lovely Saturday. See you soon. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.